Welcome back to Bearing Lifers, the podcast that keeps the industry rolling with conversations that matter. I'm Ben Walls, your pit crew chief for all things bearings, making sure we stay on track, reduce friction, and keep the conversation running smoothly. Whether you're a seasoned pro or just getting your first set of bearings, this show has something for everybody. So torque down those housing bolts and get ready, because we're driving into our 6th episode. Today, I have the privilege of welcoming a seasoned professional whose expertise in sales and business development has made a lasting impact on the bearing industry. His deep understanding of the market and strategic approach has helped drive growth and innovation. It is with great pleasure that I introduce our esteemed guest, Robert Casazza. Bob, welcome to Bearing Lifers.
Thanks, Ben. I really appreciate the invitation. I know we've been talking about this off and on for several months now, and now that I'm fully retired, I think I have the time to do this. So thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, not a problem. First guest for season 2. This is episode 1 of season 2. So
oh my goodness,
I think the timing worked out perfect.
Is that on Netflix or?
Yeah, we're hosted on YouTube currently and on our website.
Yeah, excellent.
Yeah, don't forget to subscribe. Whatever those YouTube guys say, but
that's right.
Yeah. So at Bearing Lifers, we like to get to know our guests. So how did you get into the bearing industry? What's your story? How did you become a bearing lifer? Where did it start?
Yes. So interesting story. So my father, I was born and raised in the city of Detroit, not the suburbs, the city of Detroit. Didn't move to suburbia till I was in high school. But my dad was self-employed as a hairdresser, believe it or not. That was his world. And being that he was in a shop in Grosse Pointe, Michigan, which had some affluent clientele and predominantly automotive wives of automotive executives, one day he was thinking about his 8 children. My dad had 8, God love him. And I think he was thinking, I'd like to do just a little small investment for my kids, and I don't know what to do. And so he asked some of his clients, and some of his clients talked to their husbands, and I don't know who made the recommendation, but somebody said, Gene, that was my dad's name, Eugene, you should consider buying some stock in Federal Mogul. So my dad bought 20 shares of stock in Federal Mogul for all of his children. And flash forward, I ended up going to Western Michigan University in Kalamazoo, a business major. And when I was a senior, around about February, 3 or 4 months before graduation, Federal Mogul came to campus. Now, in the late 70s, everybody wanted to go interview with Xerox and IBM and all the big name, Procter & Gamble. So when Federal Mogul came to town and put their little, hey, Federal Mogul's coming to interview, nobody knew who the hell they were, but I knew who they were.
Yeah.
Because I was a stockholder. So I interviewed with the guy at Federal Mogul, and he's like, so what brings you to Federal Mogul? And I said, well, I'm a stockholder. He about flipped out. He couldn't believe it. He said, what? I said, yeah, I own stock in Federal Mogul, so I know all about you guys. And one thing led to another, and they hired me. So if my father had not bought shares in Federal Mogul, total happenstance, right? I'm not a second generation or a third generation bearing lifer. Yeah. Literally, my dad on a tip bought Federal Mogul stock, and then I got hired.
Wow. That's wild.
Yeah, that's really wild. And what's interesting now is that Federal Mogul had just gotten the business away from Schatz Federal and on the ball bearing business for Napa Auto Parts. And Napa required a dedicated sales force. So they hired 12 kids out of college. We trained for 90 days, and then they plugged us in somewhere in the country. They gave us a company car, 4 or 5 states, and said, go get them. So I was sent from Detroit, Michigan, where I was born and raised, to Kansas City, Missouri. That was my first assignment. And the reason, I'll tell you why that's important as we get towards the end of my story. But so I was part of a training program of young people out of college and placed into selling ball bearings to Napa Auto Parts. So I was covering Kansas, Nebraska, Missouri, and Iowa by automobile. Yeah. And 35,000 miles a year on my car the first 2 years. And
easy.
Calling on rural Napa Auto Parts stores, selling them disc harrow bearings and ag specials and radial ball bearings and stuff like that.
Yeah. Ag specials for sure out that way.
That's right. Yeah. So that's kind of that was how I kind of got started. And it was total by happenstance. So
absolutely. So historically, that's where you started. After the,
Right.
the federal mogul and the sales, how did you get out of the Midwest and progress through your career?
Yeah.
What was that path like?
Yeah, so basically, I was with Federal Mogul for 10 years, and I had four different sales positions. So I was a Napa Auto Parts guy. Then I was moved to Houston, and I was just a general automotive parts salesperson to selling to automotive jobbers back in the day. Then I was industrial sales. That's where my industrial started, was down in Houston. Um, and then I got the phone call, and I got to call on Chrysler Motors. I got called back to Detroit, and called on Chrysler for about 4 years, calling on Kokomo transmission plant predominantly. So that was my transition with Federal Mogul. Was four different sales positions, and then from there I moved on to other things, and from there I had a 1 year experiment that didn't work out. I worked for Garlock for 7 years, back in Houston, industrial sales again, then called up to corporate there in Palmyra, New York. So I was a product manager, sales manager on the OE side for Garlock. Then from there, found my way to Koyo. And Koyo is the Japanese bearing manufacturer, as you know. Owned by, it's really JTech now. And in fact, I believe the Koyo name is being dropped. I'm not sure if it has been dropped, but it's going to be dropped.
It has. Yeah.
Yeah.
They're
Yeah.
just cycling it out very slowly, but you could tell everything's
Yeah.
JTech now. Yeah.
Right. So with those guys, I really had a wonderful run with those guys. Got to do a lot of different things. I was started out as a regional manager in Texas, became kind of a market manager slash product manager. Was a basically what they call a business manager over the channel. So everything that, the care and feeding of the channel, how we manage our rebates, how we go to market, control over pricing, all that kind of stuff. And then eventually ended up as the North American director of sales with Koyo, JTech. And then in 2020, I thought I was going to retire, and I had all intentions of retiring. And as the date got closer and closer, I realized I wasn't ready. And I was at that point in 2018, I was moved by Koyo. They closed the Cleveland office. I was moved here to South Carolina. And I asked my wife, I said, is it okay if I keep working? I'm just not sure I want to really retire. And she said, yeah, you can do that, but I'm a little bit tired of moving. This is our 13th house, by the way, Ben. 13 houses.
Holy smokes.
Yeah.
I'm on my second, and you're going to have to carry me out in a box, man. I'm done.
That's right.
That was rough.
Yeah. Yeah. So, so basically there's a few self-inflicted moves within a community where we just decided we want, but most of those were corporate moves. 9 or 10 of them are corporate moves. Yeah. So I found Dodge, and Dodge hired me in 2020 in the middle of COVID. And they hired me initially to be a manager. Business development was the title, and it was really to help them with M&A, mergers and acquisitions. Yep. And 30 days after they hired me in September of 2020, they got put up for sale. So my ability to do mergers and acquisitions was probably pretty limited.
Yeah. Yeah.
Since we were in the process of being sold, and as you know, we got sold to RBC. Yep. So, but thankfully they kept me around, and I did a couple of different things for a while. I worked on a lot because I had a lot of contract experience with JTech and with Federal Mogul. They basically, wanted a liaison to help them with contracts, and I'm not an attorney by education. So I was just kind of a liaison. I would help the salespeople at Dodge with contracts, help them kind of vet it a little bit, and then get it up to corporate and work with corporate and get it back to the salespeople and try to help them, close these contracts. And so that's what I was doing. But at the very end, the last 2 years, and I most recently retired, as you know, in February from Dodge, I was manager of a program called the Captains Program. And the Captains Program it's really an acronym. It's CAPT, Customer and Product Training is what it's means. And basically it was a program where we recruited kids out of college. We trained them for 9 months, which, trust me, nobody in this business does that these days. We have some competitors that do it for 6 months, and they do a great job, but we take 9 months. We hire these kids, we give them full salary and benefits. We train them all about our products. They travel. And so I took over that program. A young man had left the company that was doing it. And I have a heart for teaching anyway. And I took over that program. And then it got really fun because I took over the program when there were already trainees in the program. But then I had to go to colleges and start recruiting on my own. So in that 2 years that I did that, I either graduated students that had already started, or recruited and graduated, or recruited that not yet had graduated.
Sure.
A total of 18 young people out of college were under my tutelage for a while, and I found it to be just a blast, to be honest with you. It's kind of that giving back thing. We all have, that have been in this business long enough know that it's pretty special. It's a small group,
Yeah.
I try to remind my students of that, by the way, that like, look, this organization, power transmission in the bearing industry, is fairly small.
Yeah.
So the most important thing that you have as a young person is your reputation, and being honest and forthright, and sometimes telling people bad news, but delivering it respectfully and doing your job and telling the truth and following up and doing the things you're supposed to do. So all those things I really tried to impart upon those folks. And it was just, frankly, a most fantastic way for me to wind up my career was doing that. So anyway.
That's great. So a question about that captain's program, when you were actually going to those colleges and trying to recruit those kids, I find that trying to bring that next generation into my company, we still do things very old school with manual equipment. For me, it's trying to find those passion points with those young kids. Bearings and power transmission, it's in everything that rotates. It's in every industry. So trying to find out what they're passionate about, and then trying to correlate that passion and like grow it further into the bearing or PT industry. Did you use something similar when you were trying to set those hooks, or were these kids coming up to you with stock and Dodge and being like, yeah, I know all about you guys, and it was an easy sell?
Yeah. No, most of the time they don't. They literally think we're part of the auto company. Oh, you're a Chrysler Dodge automobiles. No, not Dodge. Not that Dodge. And I used to joke that, Horace Dodge founded, Dodge Industrial before the Dodge brothers were born. So we were first. But what I try to figure out from young people is, for a while we were only hiring mechanical engineers, but now we're looking at there's more and more sales majors out there now, actual business degrees with a sales major. Now, when I was going through school a million years ago, we didn't have that. And in the last decade, that's become more popular. And here's what I like to say to my recruits. I say, tell me a story like where your parents came home and you had disassembled the lawnmower just because you were curious and you haven't figured out how to put it back together. Or tell me a story where your grandpa was rebuilding a 65 Mustang Fastback, and you got dirty and climbed under it and worked on, did this or that. And
you were holding a flashlight.
Yeah. Tell me any of those stories. So what I used to say to them is, look, you don't have to be an engineer to be in this business. It's helpful.
Yeah.
It's totally helpful. Fantastic to be an engineer. But you have to be mechanically curious. That's the term I use, right? If you're curious about how stuff works, and that's me, right? I was a business major. I have a master's degree in business as well from University of Houston after going to Western Michigan. But I'm no engineer. I mean, I didn't have the math skills for that. But I've always been curious about how stuff works. If I'm buying a car, I want to walk into the dealership, and when the guy tells me something about the V6, I want to say, yeah, it's a 3-liter with, port fuel injection, and it's got this, that, and the other. That's how my brain works. So I was always mechanically curious, but not an engineer. And so that's what I'm looking for.
Yeah,
someone that's been okay with getting their hands dirty, even if it's not like tearing things apart, but maybe, I met a young man. I just recruited a young man who was going to school full time and working at Walmart from 2 p.m. to 10 p.m. for 3 years as a stocker. He was unloading trucks and stocking inventory. He got several opportunities to go into management, and he turned them down because he wanted to finish his degree. So
Wow.
that's getting your hands a little bit dirty. That's
Yeah.
stocking shelves, unloading trucks, but it's also showing me work ethic, right? So
Yeah. Big time.
work ethic is important, and great stories about tearing stuff apart and messing it up. And
Yeah, for sure. No, that's great.
anyway,
Um, what do you see that the current challenges in the industry are today versus
yeah,
where they were when you started? I mean, it's
yeah,
vastly different from when you started to today's industry. I mean, what are the
yeah.
new challenges that people are seeing?
Well, I do think that all of us want the Amazon Prime experience. We want to go online, look at something, see the specs, hit click, and have it at our front doorstep in 4 hours. And a lot of young customers now want a similar experience with industrial. They want to have their products like yesterday. So speed of the channel is always been a mantra that one of my a guy named Keith Miller, who is the president of Garlock, used to talk about speed to the channel in the 90s. And it's so that's still paramount, right? How quickly can you get this to me? I also think that e-commerce is incredibly, our industry was so far behind, but it's catching up. And the electronic tools that you have and the way that you make things easy to do business is super important. And then customers that are having issues and problems, they want to hear from you like pretty much immediately.
Yeah.
I can remember in the 90s, we would have pagers because we didn't really want our customers to have our cell phone numbers. So we'd have our office number on there, and we would have a pager. And then when they paged us, we'd call them. And if we got to know them well enough, we'd give them our cell phone number. Well, that's like a requirement now. Are you kidding me? It's like
Yeah.
they want to, right? They
Yeah.
want to get a hold of you immediately. So I think speed of the channel is more and more important. And I think e-commerce, and then how AI is going to change things, I don't know. I mean, it's coming really fast. As a consumer, when I'm typing into my Microsoft, and when I retired, I bought myself a new computer, and I've got Microsoft 365 on it, and I'm typing stuff and it's finishing sentences for me, and so where's that going? Where's AI going, and how do we tap into that? I think that's something that's a little bit unknown right now.
It's exciting though.
Yeah, yeah, it is exciting. I'll give
Yeah.
you that.
So, throughout your historic career, do you have a memorable bearing story, something funny or something unique that you could share with us?
Yeah, yeah. So in the late 80s, I was calling on Chrysler. I was sitting in my office in Southfield, Michigan, and I get a phone call from the Kokomo, Indiana plant. And I forget how many, it's like 100 acres under roof there. And all the automatic transmissions and transaxles were made in that plant. I know the plant still operates today. I'm not sure exactly what they're making, but basically, I worked for Federal Mogul. We had a quality problem, and they wanted me at the plant like now. So I jump in the car. I go to my apartment. I grab some stuff, pack some stuff, jump in my car, drive down there. I get down there like 2 or 3 in the afternoon, maybe 4 in the afternoon, and they got a problem related to the parts that we were making. And I have the whole plant now. You know, even at that time, they had just-in-time situations where they would load trains at 5 in the morning at Kokomo, and those trains would go down to St. Louis to have just-in-time transmissions for a St. Louis assembly plant. I believe it was St. Louis. And so we were up all night going through doing quality checks on finished transmissions to potential failures related to the products that I represented. And I had everybody in the plant up all night, everybody. So the engineering manager, production manager, quality manager. I mean, everybody except the plant manager, I met every one of them. And I'm 25 years old.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm a young dude, and I am like freaking out. I'm doing whatever I can, and even though I couldn't do much, I wasn't going to leave the plant. I'm just going to stay up and just be on the spot. So we finally get everything squared away. We get enough good transmissions figured out. We have them on racks. They're ready to go for the train to pull up at 5 a.m. or whatever it was. And that evening, it's like now it's like 1 or 2 in the morning. This quality manager comes to me, says, "Hey, by the way, Phil Bray, the plant manager, he'd like to meet you tomorrow." I said, "Oh, that'd be lovely." So I go back to my Drury Inn or whatever the heck I was staying at, and I was afraid to actually go to sleep because So I took a shower. I sat in a recliner, and like I don't know what I got a wake up call for whatever it was, and I think I dozed for an hour or two, but I didn't sleep much, right? So I walk into the plant and I walk into this ginormous guy's off in this ginormous office, the plant manager of Kokomo Transmission, right? He's got hundreds of employees. And he says, "You must be Bob." I said, "Yes, sir, Mr. Bray. Bob Casazza." I shake his hand. He goes, "Please, Bob, have a seat." So I sit down and he walks around his desk and he sits down and he looks me right in the eye and he says, "Well, young man, you really know how to F up my plant, don't you?" I said, "Yes, sir, I guess I do." And he said, "Well, I tell you what, before you go," he said, "you've cost my company a lot of money." He said, "Yes, sir, I understand we have some issues and we're going to make it right, sir, whatever it takes." And he goes, "Well, I want you to sign this document here." And he pushes this credit memo in front of me. And I said, "Well, Mr. Bray," I said, this credit memo," I said, it's blank." He says, "Yes, of course it's blank. I haven't calculated how much money you owe me yet. But by God, you're going to sign that blank credit memo before you leave." I'm like, "Okay, well, Mr. Bray," I said, "I'm not an officer of the company. I have no authority to sign that." He said, "Well, yes, you will sign that." I said, "I'm sorry, sir. No, I won't." And he huffed and he puffed, and I respectfully walked out of there, and got away without signing something that I had no authority to sign. Now, it wouldn't have made a difference if I signed it, because it wouldn't have been worth anything. But at age 24, 25, that's when I grew up. It's like there was nothing that could ever happen to me when I upset a customer where I wouldn't know how to respond. Not to say that I shouldn't be respectful and always attentive to the customer's needs, but in terms of getting scared out of your pants, I mean, that's about as high as it goes.
Yeah, for sure.
And I had hair back then, and I'm sure about 10% of it turned gray. So that's my funny bearing story.
That's
and
wild.
We did, and we did make it right. 10 days later, my boss and I came in and wrote a multi-$1,000 credit for all the expenses that we caused, and but it really was kind of, looking back at it now, it was pretty funny, because literally he was all of this super kind and all that, and he gets around to his desk and he looks at me in the eye and says what he says to me, which is, how to blank up my plant. So
yeah, just thinking of being a younger guy in the industry, going up to somebody like that and being able to have that confidence to walk out of there. It's pretty epic. I mean, that set the tone for your career, maybe.
Maybe I had an angel on my shoulder. I was a little intimidated, of course, but I knew right was right, and I wasn't going to be bullied.
Yeah,
and
that's good.
that was the difference. So anyway,
you probably gained a lot of respect regardless out of that situation.
Well, maybe. Thankfully, I never had a quality problem with Chrysler again after that.
So. Yeah, well, respect in my book anyway. Let's, for whatever that's worth.
Thank you.
So, looking back through your career, are there any other bearing lifers, any mentors that you had in the industry that kind of set you or course corrected you and kept you in the bearing industry, or that maybe were outside of the bearing industry that you realized they relied on you, or they showed you how important that was? Did you have any mentors that you would consider maybe a bearing lifer?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I certainly have some people that I owe a debt of gratitude to. A guy named Rob Hamilton. Actually, I had left JTech Coyo for a while, and left them for 4 years, and got my old job back. Rob Hamilton hired me back, and he didn't have to do that, but he did that. I think that was 2010. So I kind of owe Rob. Now Rob's in the insurance industry now, so he's outside of that. Certainly debt of gratitude to a guy named Gary Bork, who's now I think Gary's is CEO for JTech North America, I believe is his title. And Gary had the confidence in me in 2018 to move me down to South Carolina and put me into some leadership positions late in my career, which was very much appreciated. And then I was working for a guy named Mark Dickinson, who Mark is still with JTech, and he's executive. Actually, I think he's vice president of sales now. And Mark, great influence on me. Just a guy who always very level and knew how to handle pressure situations. And so lots of people that I learned from, no question about it. Way back in the Wayback Machine, Mike Verwilst was a guy that hired me, promoted me at Federal Mogul, and Mike was at the time a young man, and showed me how to be professional and how to back in those days, we were still wearing suits calling on Chrysler Motors. So like this dude, this guy had the cufflinks and the whole 9 yards. I mean, this was back in the day when appearances mattered even more than they do today. But so I guess there's a number of people. I can't say there was any one person, but those are some of the people that come to mind for me. So
I've recognized a couple of those JTech guys' names. Yeah, they're pretty good guys to work with, at least as a supplier vendor. Yeah, good guys.
Yeah. Yeah, and from a customer standpoint, I think a person who's really been a great friend over the years is Jack Simpson. I know you know Jack, and
love Jack.
Jack can be firm. He represents his company well, and he can be firm and direct, but he's fair, and he'll pull you aside and coach you a little bit on things when needed. And Jack's always been a great friend, and as we stayed in touch quite a long time, even though we don't work together anymore. So Jack's a great customer friend and great person who's done a little coaching with me, I think, as well. So
yeah, Jack's fantastic. Hopefully another season 2 Bearing Lifer episode with Jack
hopefully
Simpson.
Yes, that would be awesome.
Still trying to reel him in.
Okay, good.
So now that you are officially retired, do you think there's anything that companies can do to utilize the bearing lifers that are starting to retire out of the industry without letting them go officially? You have a ton of lessons you've learned through your career. So how can companies tap into that resource of those bearing lifers that have, like yourself, that are just now starting to enjoy your own personal time?
Yeah. So great question. Obviously, if they have a heart for teaching, not everybody does, but my mom was a teacher too, so maybe it's in my blood, but I enjoy teaching and coaching. The other thing that I think is a trend, I read the Wall Street Journal pretty regularly, and in the past couple of years, they've had a few articles on the fact that as baby boomers are retiring at a rapid rate, some companies are just letting them walk out the door without proper, debriefing, if you will. And what a lot of companies are finding is a better way to go is some sort of glide path out. So at Dodge, I'll give Dodge credit here. They let me go to 4 days a week for the last 18 months or so. So, that was a great way for me to kind of get into the mindset of retirement eventually. So first I went 4.5 days, then I went 4. When I took on the captain's program, it was kind of a new thing. I went back to 4.5 days, but eventually the last year I was only 4 days a week. So a lot of companies are doing that now, where they're saying, okay, look, we don't want to lose you, and we know that you're kind of got one foot in retirement. How about we just make this a little easier on you, and you can do what you do for 4 days a week. And one thing about getting old, I mean, your body starts to fail you a little bit, but you do get a little smarter. And I learned that in basically 32 hours a week, with a couple hours on the weekend to prepare myself for Monday, I could get done what I could do in my 30s or 40s in 5 days a week. And that's because I've bumped my head enough times to know, what not to do. And so I think that's a really great way to do it, is to either get involved in training or allow someone to sort of, taper back their hours to the point where then they can step out. And as they're tapering down, make sure that you're transitioning. I think that's where companies fail a lot is, if you can hire your replacement, and most companies don't want to have to pay 2 people in a similar role.
Yep.
But if you can do that and you can coach that replacement, that's so much better than to just like, you know, have a 1-day meeting with somebody like who's going to take your job and then you just walk out the door. I mean, that's crazy.
Yeah, you can't. The amount of historical, tribal knowledge that you could pass in a 1 day kind of pass off, 1 week pass off is next to nothing. You might as well just not have that conversation. But that glide path, that nice easing out process, I think a lot of companies definitely need to start adapting to that mindset, because there's a lot of people that are starting to age out. The next generation's not as large coming into this industry. We either have to make it more attractive, get a ton more people, or really gain as much of that tribal knowledge from
Right.
everybody leaving the industry as possible.
That's right. And I do think, I mean, you're kind of got your hands in it because you're talking to people like me all the time. I do think we're seeing almost an avalanche of people that are going to be retiring the next 24 to 36 months, I'm sure.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
So,
I mean, John Masick he was my last guest. He was season finale, season one, and I got him one or 2 weeks before he officially retired. So
okay.
yeah, I mean,
Yep.
everybody's starting to get to that point. And I'm going to say I'm a little this might be a little selfish for me to be having these conversations. It's a chance for me to get my hooks into people and have these kind of conversations. Because my last question I'm going to ask you for
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
little interview is the lessons you've learned during your career. What could you highlight as like your top 5 or 6 lessons, and why were
Yeah.
they important for your career?
Yeah. Well, handling upset customers. I mean, I just talked to
Yeah,
you about my Chrysler story. I mean,
yeah,
that's you got to know how to do that. And I think the most important thing is make sure they're heard. We as salespeople, I'm guilty. In fact, I've been guilty of it in this conversation a little bit, where I'm not giving you a chance to get a question in, but we got to listen more. We got to listen. We make sure we understand their problems before we respond to a problem. So handling upset customers. Uh, I know a lot of the bearing lifers you talked to had great stories about technical things that they solved. I wasn't the most technical guy, but what I think is really a skill that's important is handling commercial issues, commercial situations, negotiations, contracts, rebates, discounts. Trying to come in to bring in a contract opportunity on a glide path and to have a win-win, right? I mean, you want your customer to be comfortable, you want to be comfortable, you want a win-win, right? So those things, commercial situations, good hires, bad hires. You're going to make bad hires. You're going to hire people that don't work out, and your job unfortunately, is to try to give people second chances. I do think we're a society that when people when people fail, we're all too quick to want to throw them out the window. And I think sometimes we don't allow people to fail enough because we learn from our failures. I've had plenty of failures.
yeah,
I really have. And from those failures, I've learned. So, making decisions on hiring and hiring the right people in the first place, that is really something that with the training program that I got involved in and going to college recruiting, I hired like 12 of the 18 people that were going through the program. I hired like 12 of them, and you really start to get an idea of what you're looking for. And I do think that proper interviewing is a little bit elusive for some of us, and I still struggled. I would sometimes hire the wrong people. It just happens. So hiring practices are important. Um, and I think allowing for failure, as I've said, I've fallen down. I've lost my job more than once, and in every time I actually bettered myself. Losing your job is not the end of the world. It's what you do about it after.
yeah.
And sometimes you're just not a proper fit for a company. So falling down and getting back up again and dusting yourself off, and then giving back. I mean, that's what I was very fortunate to be able to do with Dodge, which was to be involved in a training program.
Yeah.
I go back to that first story I told you about being hired by Federal Mogul. 90 days of training, loading a U-Haul, right?
Yeah.
I drove my first company car. I hate to admit this. I'm going to date myself. It was a Ford Granada inline 6-cylinder with air conditioning and no cruise control.
Hey,
No
you got
cruise
the air
control.
conditioning.
I had the air conditioning, right? So I think giving back is huge, and I think as we get closer to retirement, for people like me, and now that I am retired, you're no longer trying to get that next promotion as you're going through the end of your career, and it really does give you an opportunity. It's not always about trying to get to the next spot. It's more about how can I help somebody, and I think I wish I would have been more mindful of that as I was excelling in my career. Not that I didn't do some of that, but I think you become more in tune with it as you get older, and as you're about to come to the end, you're like, wow, you know, um, I can really help some people out here, and I need to make sure I do some of that before I get out of here. So anyway, hope that
Du-
helps.
Duly noted, for sure. Yeah, no, I'll take that to heart. Well, Bob, I really appreciate you coming on. It was a fantastic conversation. I'm sure our viewers are going to really appreciate it. So thank you very
Thank
much.
you, Ben. Thank you. This has been a pleasure. I really appreciate you nudging me more than once to get this done. It's been a real pleasure for me as well.
I'm sure we'll talk again.
All right. Take care
Thanks,
now.
Bob. That's a wrap on this episode of Bearing Lifers. We got an exciting lineup ahead, so make sure to subscribe, follow, and stay tuned for more conversations with the experts shaping the future of the bearing industry. And if you or someone you know has a great story to share, have them reach out to me on LinkedIn. We're always looking for a bearing lifer to join the conversation. Until next time, keep those bearings turning.